He walked with a limp. The black belt saw an easy target, a punchline to boost his own ego in front of a crowded gym. He called him weak. He laughed. But he didn't know the man he'd just challenged had spent years fighting for his life, in places where there are no mats, no referees, and no tapping out. The Oak Creek Community Center smelled exactly how you'd expect. A stagnant blend of floor wax, old chlorine from the pool down the hall, and the sharp, sour tang of sweat. It was a Tuesday evening. The fluorescent lights overhead hummed with a cheap, flickering energy, casting harsh shadows across the worn vinyl mats that covered the center of the gymnasium floor. Derek held court in the middle of it all. He was a big guy, hovering somewhere around 220 pounds, most of it packed into a broad chest and thick shoulders. He wore a crisp, jet-black G that looked like it had never seen the wrong side of a washing machine. A thick, faded black belt was knotted precisely at his waist. He was the head instructor of the adult self-defense class, a local fixture who treated the community center like his own private kingdom. To Derek, martial arts wasn't about discipline or self-discovery. It was about audience. It was about the 15 people sitting on the folding chairs at the edge of the mats, nodding in wide-eyed reverence as he barked instructions. "You have to dominate the space," Derek projected, his voice booming off the cinder block walls. He grabbed his demonstration partner, a lanky accountant named Paul, who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else, and jerked him forward. "If you show weakness, the street eats you alive. Predators look for the limp, the slouch, the guy who avoids eye contact." Derek swept Paul's leg out from under him. The accountant hit the mat with a heavy, ungraceful thud, knocking the wind from his lungs. "Sorry, Paul," Derek said, though the smirk on his face suggested otherwise. He didn't offer a hand to help the man up. The pavement doesn't apologize. You have to be rigid, unbreakable. Standing near the double doors, leaning against the cold, painted brick, was Thomas. Thomas wasn't looking at Derek. He was watching the clock above the bleachers, waiting for the high school girls' volleyball practice to finish in the adjacent gym so he could drive his teenage daughter home. He wore faded gray sweatpants, a plain navy t-shirt, and a weathered pair of running shoes. He was 42, his hair thinning slightly at the crown, with deep, exhausted lines etched around his eyes. If you looked closely, you could see the way he stood. All his weight was shifted onto his left leg. His right leg was straight, planted a little too deliberately. Thomas hated crowds. He hated the noise, the echoing acoustics, the unpredictable movements of strangers. Since coming back from Helmand Province 6 years earlier, his brain had permanently rewired itself to scan rooms for exits, to catalog the hands of everyone in his immediate vicinity, to measure the distance between himself and the nearest solid cover. It was an exhausting way to live. Most days, he just wanted to be invisible. Unfortunately for Thomas, Derek's radar was actively searching for a contrast to his own perceived greatness. Derek dismissed the class for a 5-minute water break. He paced the edge of the mats, rolling his shoulders, adrenaline still pumping through his system. His eyes swept over the parents waiting for their kids, the locals reading magazines, and finally landed on the quiet man leaning against the wall. Derek recognized the posture immediately. The shifted weight, the slight slump of the shoulders, the avoidance of the spotlight. To a bully, it looked like prey. "Hey!" Derek called out. His voice cut through the low chatter of the gym. "Buddy by the door." Thomas didn't react immediately. He assumed the man was talking to someone else. He just checked his watch again. 10 more minutes. "Yeah, you. The guy holding up the wall." Thomas slowly turned his head. His expression was completely blank. He didn't look angry or scared or annoyed. He just looked tired. "Can I help you?" "Come over here for a second," Derek said, gesturing with 2 fingers. "I need a fresh body." Paul's tapped out. Thomas shook his head slightly. "I'm just waiting for my daughter. Thanks, though." It was a polite refusal. A normal person would have nodded and moved on. But Derek operated on a different frequency. A refusal in front of his students wasn't just a no. It was a challenge to his authority in the room he controlled. Derek chuckled, a loud, abrasive sound meant to draw the attention of the resting class. Come on, man. It's a community center. Get involved. I just need to demonstrate a wrist release. It won't hurt. Much. I'm fine, Thomas said. His voice was quieter this time, but the tone had shifted. It was flat, final. Derek's smile tightened. He stepped off the mat, his bare feet slapping against the polished hardwood floor as he walked toward the door. The distance between them closed rapidly. The room began to quiet down. People set down their water bottles. Conversations died. The awkward, heavy tension of an impending confrontation settled over the gym. You know, Derek said, stopping a few feet from Thomas, crossing his thick arms over his chest. I was just telling my class about body language, about how victims present themselves. You're a textbook case, buddy. You're leaning on that wall like you can't even hold your own weight up. Thomas looked at Derek. He looked at the perfectly clean GE, the manicured nails, the puffed-out chest. He saw a man who had never been truly afraid in his entire life. I have a bad leg, Thomas said simply. Derek snorted. Everyone's got an excuse. A bad leg, a bad back. The world doesn't care about your bad leg when it comes for you. Weakness is a choice. You're broadcasting to everyone in this room that you're an easy mark. Thomas didn't move. He didn't puff out his chest. He didn't raise his voice. He just looked at Derek with eyes that had seen things the strip mall sensei couldn't comprehend on his darkest days. Okay, Thomas said. Have a good night. He turned his body away, signaling the conversation was over. But Derek reached out and grabbed Thomas's right shoulder. It wasn't a hard grab, but the intent was loud. It was ownership. It was a physical demand for compliance. The moment Derek's fingers closed over the cheap cotton of the navy t-shirt, the atmosphere in the room snapped. Thomas didn't flinch. He didn't gasp. What happened was a micro-adjustment so fast, so seamlessly violent in its potential, that only a trained eye would have caught it. Thomas's left foot pivoted a quarter inch. His center of gravity dropped. His right hand twitched, rising just an inch from his side before his conscious mind caught up with his muscle memory and forced it down. For a fraction of a second, Thomas wasn't in a community center in Ohio. He was in a dusty compound outside Marjaw. The smell of floor wax vanished, replaced by the copper tang of blood and burning diesel. He took a slow, deep breath. He forced the ghost out of his head. He looked down at the hand on his shoulder. Take your hand off me, Thomas said. The words weren't yelled. They were spoken at a conversational volume, but they carried a terrifying, hollow weight. It was the voice of a man explaining gravity. It wasn't a threat. It was a fact. Derek felt it. A sudden, cold spike of unease shot up his spine. For a second, his instincts told him to let go, to back away, to laugh it off. But he looked over his shoulder. 15 students were watching him. 3 soccer moms were watching him. He was the alpha of the room. He couldn't back down from a crippled guy in sweatpants. Or what? Derek sneered, his ego loudly shouting down his survival instinct. You're going to limp away aggressively? You're too weak to even stand straight? I'm trying to do you a favor, man. I'm trying to show you how not to be a victim. Dad? The voice came from the hallway. Thomas's eyes darted past Derek. Sarah was standing there. She was 15, wearing her knee pads and clutching a gym bag. She looked from her father to the large man grabbing his shoulder. Her face fell. She knew exactly what was happening. She knew her dad's history, knew about his PTSD, knew about the days he couldn't get out of bed because the phantom pain in the leg he left in Afghanistan was screaming at him. And she knew what her dad used to do for a living before the IED. Everything is fine, Sarah, Thomas said, his voice instantly warming, softening for her benefit. Just go wait by the car. Give me the keys. Sarah didn't move. She stared at Derek. Let go of my dad. Derek laughed, finally releasing Thomas's shoulder, holding his hands up in mock surrender. Whoa, easy there. Just trying to help your old man out. He looks like a stiff breeze could knock him over. He turned back to Thomas. Hiding behind your kid now? Classic. A few of the students on the mats exchanged uncomfortable glances. This had crossed the line from a pushy instructor to something ugly and personal, but nobody spoke up. The bystander effect held them paralyzed in their folding chairs. Thomas watched his daughter. He saw the embarrassment and the fear in her eyes. He hated himself for bringing that fear into her life again. He had spent 6 years trying to be just a normal dad, a boring dad, a guy who drove to volleyball practice and cooked mediocre spaghetti. He looked back at Derek. The black belt was smiling, soaking in his perceived victory. Thomas realized something in that moment. If he walked away now, Derek would tell this story tomorrow. He would tell his students how he backed down a weak, broken man. He would reinforce the idea that loudness equals strength, that aggression equals safety. And worse, Sarah would see her father let a bully humiliate him. Thomas reached into his pocket, pulled out his car keys, and tossed them to Sarah. "Start the car," Thomas said. "Dad, don't," Sarah whispered. "He's an idiot. It doesn't matter." "Start the car, sweetie. I'll be out in 2 minutes." Sarah hesitated, then turned and pushed through the double doors into the cool night air. Thomas turned back to Derek. He didn't look angry. He looked profoundly burdened. He slowly took off his jacket, draping it over a nearby chair. "You wanted to demonstrate something," Thomas said. "Show me." Derek's smile widened into a predatory grin. "You sure about this, buddy? I'm not going to pay your hospital bills." "I have excellent VA coverage," Thomas replied dryly. He walked to the edge of the mat. His gait was uneven, a distinct limp on the right side. The right leg of his sweatpants hung a little straighter, a little stiffer than the left. He stopped at the edge of the vinyl, kicked off his running shoes, and stepped onto the mat in his socks. Derek jogged to the center of the mat, bouncing on his toes, rolling his neck until it popped loudly. "All right, class, pay attention. Real-world scenario, uncooperative subject. Notice his base. It's narrow. It's weak. He's practically begging to be taken to the ground." Thomas walked to the center. He didn't take a fighting stance. He just stood there, arms hanging loosely at his sides. He looked entirely unimposing. "Whenever you're ready," Thomas said. Derek didn't hesitate. He wanted a quick, humiliating end to this. He stepped in fast, closing the distance, his right hand shooting out to grab Thomas's lapel area, his left hand raising to feint a strike. It was a classic schoolyard bully move, refined with a bit of dojo polish. Grab, unbalance, strike. The crowd held its breath, expecting the smaller, older man to get crumpled. They saw the grab, but they didn't see what happened next. It was too fast, too devoid of the theatrical wind-ups they were used to seeing in action movies. As Derek's hand slammed into Thomas's chest, Thomas didn't resist the force. He absorbed it, rotating his hips to the right, letting Derek's momentum carry the heavier man forward. At the exact same moment, Thomas's left hand came up, not as a closed fist, but open. The heel of his palm drove sharply into the crook of Derek's elbow. Pop! The joint hyperextended slightly. It wasn't enough to break it, but it was enough to send a blinding flash of nerve pain shooting up Derek's arm. Derek gasped, his grip breaking instantly. He stumbled forward past Thomas, his balance entirely shattered. Thomas hadn't taken a single step. He had just pivoted. Derek caught himself, spinning around, his face flushing crimson. The smirk was gone, replaced by sudden, confused anger. "Lucky," he muttered, shaking his tingling arm. "You telegraphed," Thomas said softly. "You breathed in before you moved. Don't do that." The room was dead silent. The accountant, Paul, was leaning forward in his chair, his jaw slightly open. Derek roared, humiliated. He abandoned the grabs and went for a strike. He launched a heavy, sweeping right hook aimed squarely at Thomas's jaw. It was a knockout punch thrown with bad intentions. Thomas watched the punch come, To him, it moved in slow motion. He saw the shoulder drop, saw the hips open up, saw the angry, unfocused glare in Derek's eyes. Instead of stepping back to avoid the blow, Thomas stepped in. He moved inside the arc of the punch, completely smothering it. His left forearm crashed into Derek's bicep, stopping the swing dead in its tracks. Simultaneously, Thomas's right hand, flat and rigid, struck Derek cleanly in the center of the chest, right on the sternum. It wasn't a punch. It was a push strike, utilizing the kinetic energy of Derek's own forward movement. The breath exploded out of Derek's lungs in a violent whoosh. The bigger man was lifted slightly off his toes and thrown backward. He staggered 3 steps and fell hard onto his backside, sitting squarely on the mat. The heavy thud echoed in the quiet gym. Derek sat there wheezing, his eyes wide with shock. He couldn't catch his breath. He looked up at the man in the sweatpants. Thomas was still standing exactly where the exchange had happened. He wasn't breathing hard. His face hadn't changed. He looked like a man waiting in line at the post office. "You're fighting angry," Thomas said. "Anger makes you stupid. It makes you tense. You're wasting energy." "You son of a—" Derek wheezed, scrambling to his feet. His pride was utterly shattered. He was being lectured in his own gym by a guy he thought was a helpless victim. Derek noticed the limp again. He remembered the rigid right leg. He decided to exploit the weakness he had mocked earlier. "Let's see how you stand without that leg," Derek snarled. He rushed forward, dropping his level. He aimed a vicious, driving low kick squarely at Thomas's right shin. In Muay Thai, it was a leg chopper meant to deaden the nerve and drop an opponent instantly. Derek threw it with every ounce of frustration and malice he had left. A collective gasp went up from the crowd. It was a dirty move. It was brutal. Thomas didn't try to check the kick. He didn't try to lift his leg. He just braced his stance. Derek's shin connected with Thomas's right leg. There was no meaty slap of skin on skin. There was no crack of bone breaking. Instead, there was a loud, hollow, metallic clang. It sounded like someone had taken a baseball bat to a steel pipe. Derek let out a scream that was high, thin, and entirely devoid of ego. He collapsed to the mat, grabbing his own shin, writhing in absolute agony. He'd essentially kicked a steel pillar at full force. Thomas stood there looking down at the rolling martial arts instructor. Slowly, methodically, Thomas reached down to the hem of his right sweatpant leg. He pulled the gray fabric upward over his ankle, over his calf, up to his knee. The fluorescent gym lights gleamed off the brushed titanium and carbon fiber of his prosthetic leg. The metal pylon was scratched and worn, a mechanical marvel of engineering that replaced everything below the knee. The silence in the gymnasium was absolute. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The only sound was Derek's pathetic groaning on the floor. Thomas let the pant leg drop back down. "You're right about one thing," Thomas said, his voice carrying easily across the dead quiet room. "The world doesn't care about your excuses. It doesn't care about your belts, or your trophies, or how loud you yell." Thomas stepped over Derek, moving back to the edge of the mat. He picked up his running shoes and slipped them on, not bothering to tie the laces. He picked up his jacket. He didn't look back at the instructor on the floor. He looked at the 15 students sitting in the chairs. They were staring at him with a mixture of awe and deep, profound shame. "Real violence isn't a performance," Thomas told them, his eyes meeting theirs one by one. "It's ugly, it's fast, and it takes pieces of you that you never get back." He turned and walked toward the double doors, his uneven gait echoing softly against the hardwood. "Have a good night," Thomas said over his shoulder, and he walked out, leaving the alpha of the strip mall crying on the floor. The parking lot was mostly empty, bathed in the sickly amber glow of sodium vapor streetlights. Thomas's 10-year-old sedan idled near the curb, the heater blowing aggressively against the autumn chill. He opened the driver's side door and slid behind the wheel. He didn't slam the door. He closed it gently, with a quiet, deliberate click. Sarah was in the passenger seat. She had her knees pulled up to her chest, her arms wrapped around them. She watched him intently as he put the car in drive and pulled away from the community center. The silence stretched for 3 blocks. It wasn't an angry silence. It was heavy, saturated with the adrenaline that was slowly draining out of both of them. "You hit him," Sarah finally said. Her voice was small in the dark cabin of the car. "I pushed him," Thomas corrected gently. He kept his eyes on the road. "There's a difference." "He kicked your leg. Hard." "Yeah, he did." Thomas let out a slow, measured exhale. "He won't do that again." Sarah let her legs drop down to the floorboards. She turned in her seat to look at her father's profile. The streetlights strobed rhythmically across his face, highlighting the deep grooves around his mouth and the permanent exhaustion settling into his eyes. "Are you okay?" she asked. It was a loaded question. She wasn't just asking about the physical confrontation. She was asking about the ghosts. She was asking about the locked boxes in his head that he spent every waking hour trying to keep shut. "I'm fine, kiddo," Thomas said. He reached across the center console and squeezed her shoulder. "I'm sorry you had to see that. I tried to walk away." "I know you did," Sarah said fiercely. "He was a jerk. He was bullying you." She paused, a tiny nervous smile tugging at the corner of her mouth. "It was kind of cool, though, when he kicked the titanium." Thomas let out a short, dry chuckle. It sounded rusty. "It wasn't cool, Sarah. It was stupid. It was pointless ego, all of it. He deserved it." "Nobody deserves anything," Thomas replied quietly. "Things just happen, and you deal with them. But you don't go looking for it. You never go looking for it." They drove the rest of the way in comfortable quiet. The neighborhood grew older, the houses smaller, the trees thicker. Thomas pulled into their short concrete driveway and cut the engine. Once inside the house, the adrenaline crash hit him like a physical blow. He sent Sarah upstairs to shower and do her homework. He stood in the kitchen for a long time, staring out the window over the sink into the dark backyard. He listened to the hum of the refrigerator,